Hello and welcome to another installment of Emergence into the Wild. An installment of topics for 10 for the living these days. Compassion Fatigue Edition. Today I sat in on a Zoom call with Episcopal Church leaders, and the topic focused on mental health and especially in the area of compassion fatigue and burnout. And realizing that compassion fatigue is a real thing, especially for the living of these days. And so we are overwhelmed with emotional toll of not only the virus, but the violence around the world and our empathy, our feeling for the other and the pain caused by war and racism and bigotry and hatred and just in the pandemic. It can be overwhelming. Our religion and our politics, etc., etc. So take a moment in this time to check yourself for compassion fatigue or burnout so you can find a way to recharge, to heal, to listen, learn, and love in the midst of such pain. So I share a blog that I read today, and it is from India. And the title is, Yes, Compassion Fatigue is Real, especially during COVID-19, by Malika Javari. This was written April 26th in 2021. She writes, India is going through a hard time right now. Most of us start our day with a warm cup of tea and sad, cold news. Every day we read about the ugly side of COVID-19, whether it is the shortage of oxygen, hospital woes, or increasing mortalities. Our hearts ache for the overworked frontline staff, COVID-19 patients, their families, and essentially the dire state of our nation. However, sometimes our hearts don't ache, she writes, or sometimes they ache so much that you feel the pain 24/7 and are in a constant state of stress. Both sides of the spectrum of emotions can be termed as compassion fatigue, and it is more common than you think. This article by Healthline describes it as compassion fatigue is the emotional and physical burden created by caring for those in distress. It's total emotional depletion. Those experiencing compassion fatigue tend to lose touch with their empathy. They feel overwhelmed and are less connected to their work and their loved ones. Compassion fatigue is primarily seen in doctors and nurses and therapists, caregivers, and others who hold empathically the depth of feeling and pain of others, who face human suffering daily. However, due to the pandemic and the constant coverage of tragedy, instant news on patient sufferings and social media spread real, painful stories. All of us are suddenly surrounded by human pain, and this can get overwhelming. While it is in no way comparable to what frontline workers face, it does have an effect on us and our mentality. Again, she writes, and coming from um, India, but also speaking to all of us. She writes, why people face compassion fatigue. People face compassion fatigue because they tend to take on the trauma and the suffering of the people they are around or looking after. In the article, American Psychological Association, Carrie Schwartz, PhD at Coastal Carolina University, said that compassion fatigue doesn't just make it difficult to feel empathy for human pain, but can also result in burnout, too much work, and not enough resources to do that work well. And secondary traumatic stress, which trigger empathy overload, leading to anxiety and intrusive thoughts and hypervigilance and numbness of feelings of having nothing left to give. Dr. Amit Sood, in his book The Mayo Clinic Guide to Stress-Free Living aptly explains compassion fatigue being experienced by those who aren't healthcare workers. And he says, we are inundated with graphic images of unimaginable suffering of millions. We can fathom the suffering of a few, but a million becomes a statistic that numbs us. And so the symptoms of compassion fatigue, this article of Good Therapy states these are some common states of compassion fatigue: chronic physical and emotional exhaustion, depersonalization and detachment, anxiety, stress, and or depression, irritability, feelings of self-contempt, sleeping, weight loss or weight gain, headaches, poor job satisfaction, lack of productivity, substance addiction. And so in light of this, she concludes her article, Overcoming Compassion Fatigue. With the surge of COVID-19, compassion fatigue is on the rise, and especially for the frontline workers, but all of us. And however, here are a few things, and I encourage all of us to contemplate, that one can do to deal with it based on information provided by Psychology Today, American Psychological Association, and Healthline. The first step is to acknowledging compassion fatigue and recognizing the signs. An expert, a questionnaire on stress, says through awareness and healthy self-care, those who experience compassion fatigue can start to understand the complexity of the emotions they've been juggling and most likely suppressing. So here, as I conclude, are ways for us to combat, to find healing and find a way of re-energizing, rejuvenation. One, consistent self-care, whether it's a quick meditation session, 5-minute morning journaling, or even going for a run or a walk every other day. Stick to a consistent self-care routine to make you calmer, happier, and take care your mind off and take your mind off of stressors. 2, ask for help. Ask a professional person to help you out when you need, or a friend, and just talk it out, name it. Ask someone to run with you. Ask through this checklist in your mind. Ask for help. 3, stay away from the bad news. Take a break from digitized life. Take a break from Facebook. Take a break from the constant inundated 24/7 news cycles. And pray or meditate or just be in silence. When given a choice, don't allow the news to so overwhelm you that it depletes you, your ability to be empathic to your neighbor. 4, focus on what you can control. This one is mostly for non-medical workers, growing numb to rising COVID deaths and the grim news in our world. One cannot help the situation in India, and it's overwhelming. It's not in our control. Instead, focus on the things that are. Feed stray animals, take care of your of your pet, start a garden, plant, go and connect to your family and friends, reach out to your neighbors. And then 5, cultivate empathic discernment. Understand your limits, set boundaries with others, replying with statements like, I care about what you have to say, but I don't have the energy to fully engage in this conversation right now. Can we speak later? It can help a lot to just acknowledge your need, to detach, to re-energize and refocus. So in light of that, do some more research yourself on ways with compassion, fatigue, and burnout, and examine your life and how you are being depleted so that you can re-energize, so that you can be for the other, more empathic. So until we meet again, peace, calm, grace. Be gentle with yourself.